understand why the God of the Old Testament was so, I don't know, strict. Strict, what do you mean? He just had rules for everything, even like down to not having a goatee. Those rules. This is where understanding a little bit of cultural context would help you. God was basically trying to make Israel look totally different from all of the other cultures that were surrounding them. Why was that important? Because they were crazy. How they worshipped their gods was through things like child sacrifice and things like that. But what does not having a goatee have to do with that? Pretty much every law that the Lord gave Israel was to differentiate them from the groups that were around them. He didn't want them engaging in the crazy practices that those people engaged with when they worshiped their gods. One example is even down to how they shaved their beards. He didn't even want them looking like those people. So you're saying that the point of the rules was to create cultural separation between Israel and the cultures that surrounded them? That's exactly what they were for. Okay, that's really helpful to know. Where did you learn this? I follow Caleb.
Well, that was some other bullshit, and maybe you need to stop following Caleb, because that means you're just following yourself, which is a very good way to get people to follow your page. I kind of like that aspect of it, because I follow Coach Renz. But the idea that many of the Old Testament laws, or all the Old Testament laws in the way he said it, were introduced in order to completely cause their people to look differently than the rest of the people, that is a complete lie, a complete and total lie. And let me give you an example. Many will say that the way that this guy wanted to know that his children were different from the rest of the children of the world was that they participated in the circumcision. Well, it is very well known that that there are other groups of people who also participated in circumcision. Guess who one of those groups were? The Egyptians. Now, it wasn't as widespread as meaning everybody participated in circumcisions in Egypt, but especially those of the aristocracy and the kingship practiced circumcision. So the idea that circumcision was something that indicated that you are a part of Yahweh's cult is not an actual true thing. It is something that they picked up from being under Egyptian rule for thousands of years, as they were Canaanite people who then became Israelite people. So they maintained the circumcision as one of those things because it was something that the aristocrats and the royalty did. So they felt that that was something that they should incorporate to all their people because it was of a higher standard. And that's why they did it. Now, according to your Bible in Leviticus, it says that the firstborn of every child of Israel is supposed to be dedicated to God, given to God in the Molech sacrifice. The Molech is not a god, a deity that they sacrifice children from, but the actual sacrificing of children is called a Moloch. And so then the Israelites originally sacrificed children as well, based on their gods telling them to do so. It wasn't until later on that the priesthood realized that if they said that the first child would be represented by a Levite, then you don't have to sacrifice that child. And if there weren't enough Levites, then any other child that was born, male child, firstborn, then you just had to pay the Levites 25, I believe it's 25 pieces of silver in order for that first child to be redeemed. That wasn't about them separating. That was about making some money and going away from, that was about them figuring out a way to make money and go away from child sacrifice. And then they villainized everybody else for those who did that very same thing. Most cultures didn't do child sacrifices, didn't do the Moloch. So in Egyptians, they didn't participate in child sacrifice. So how is it a separation? The Sumerians didn't do child sacrifice. So how is it a separation? So their ideas that these things were done to separate them are nothing more than a falsehood. It is nothing more than Elion giving Yahweh his people instead of saying, instead of being given land as Elion gave all the other guys lands. So this is not correct at all. So coming down to the shaving and all these other things, these are just a bunch of rules. Some of them are to separate and to do things differently. But many of those rules were already part of other cultures that were in the surrounding areas because they picked those ideas up. Israelites originally worshiped Asherah, the wife of El. But then Yahweh, who was their son initially from the Canaanite deities, pantheon rather, Then Yahweh became El and was still married to Asherah, and it wasn't until around the 4th century BCE that they actually got rid of Asherah and made this god eternal, which is something that they picked up from the Zoroastrians. So this idea that they were creating this god, that this god was creating his own people separate, is not really accurate. It's just the fact that they made this god become something different over time, because at no time in time frame can you see this god maintaining and being the same. There's no univocality of this god. It changes based on the culture, and every religion changes based on the culture. So this is nothing more than a bold-faced lie. But what do you guys think? Always remember, you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.